I am Carmen Roman. I am a clinical psychologist, and I am here to help you with your emotions, whether you are in a leadership position or you are parenting or whatever you need to be successful. We are going to help you to manage your emotions, and I am very happy to do so. In today's episode, we are going to talk about vulnerability. Sometimes we feel really sensitive, vulnerable, scared to jump into new things. Sometimes we don't find the courage, or we just, I don't know. This is why I don't know. This is why I'm bringing you the licensed social worker, Patricia Young, and we will ask all the questions. Let me give you some examples. We will ask her about what is it? What is vulnerability? And what relationship has with courage? Is courage something that we're born with, or we just make it during our life? What are the skills involving in learning how to be courageous? She will bring some personal examples. So stay with us, because it will take courage to learn what you are going to learn today.
Living in harmony is possible if you know your emotions and how to handle them. Dr. Carmen Roman will share with you in an engaging way the current psychology by sharing herself or interviewing experts who will inspire you. Learn how to live a life of fullness and how to recover your emotional harmony with Dr. Roman. Welcome to Emotions in Harmony.
Hello again, amigos in harmony. We are here with Patricia Young, and she's a licensed social worker. She received her undergraduate and graduate degree in social work from the SDSU back in 1995, 1998. She's from my generation. Yay! She has been licensed since 2006. And she works with hospitals. She has been working in hospitals, hospice, private. She works now in private practice, with adoptions, with people with chronic mental illness. She also has worked with anxiety and depression, and aging, terminal illness, chronic illness, trauma. You know that we always look for those licensed mental clinicians that can help us to create better relationships. So, Patricia, welcome.
Hi, Carmen. Thanks for having me.
I am so honored that you accepted. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Tell me a little more about yourself. Tell me what you are up to lately in your career.
Well, I specialize in working with highly sensitive people. I'm just getting ready to launch a podcast called Unapologetically Sensitive. It's a podcast for sensitive people and the people that love them. We explore what the strengths are behind being sensitive. So I'm really excited. It should be, by the time this podcast airs, it should be up on iTunes and available to listen to.
So you are almost ready to launch?
I am so excited. I can hardly stand it.
Wow. Well, congratulations. It's a lot of work just to get to that point.
Thank you.
It is. And I like the title. How do you say that?
Unapologetically sensitive. So it means we have strength in being sensitive. It's great. We've got superpowers. And instead of feeling bad about the perceived thought of being weak and sensitive, that there's tremendous strength and courage in being sensitive. And that's the message that I want to convey.
I'm sure you will have a lot of listeners. I really like the title. So good luck on that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, Patricia, what do you think is vulnerability?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like I'm a walking poster child for vulnerability. But when you sent me the questions for the podcast, I really do. I didn't have the language to talk about vulnerability. So I go to Brené Brown for all of my content around vulnerability. So what I'm going to be giving you is really what she says, because I know how to do vulnerability, but it's a lot harder to talk about the research behind it. I'm not a researcher. So what Brené Brown says is vulnerability has 3 elements to it: being willing to be uncertain, taking risk, and allowing yourself to have emotional exposure.
Okay, so let's go with the first one. What is the first one?
Uncertainty. So it means that when you are going to be vulnerable, you really don't know what the outcome is. You open yourself up to being in a place where you're not really sure how people are going to receive what you have to offer. You don't know what's going to happen. It's much easier to tell people, but when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we really open ourselves up for possibilities that we can't imagine. We typically think that it's going to have a fearful or bad outcome, but what happens is we allow ourselves to have an amazing connection if it's the right communication.
It's kind of taking the risk of living in the present moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. I don't like that. It doesn't feel good.
It doesn't. It doesn't. And I can tell you that I've had times where I get nauseous. I call it a vulnerability hangover. I get nauseous. I get a pit in my stomach. I was feeling nervous about doing this interview. I can talk to you about personal experiences, and I really want to make sure we have time to get to what I feel like are some really good examples of how vulnerability comes up in my life and how I work with it. But I've had a knot in the pit of my stomach. I've been feeling nervous and anxious. Not only is that feeling vulnerable, but the fact that I'm sharing that with you, I'm letting you see a part of me. I could come on and smile and tell you everything's fine, but I'm letting you see a part of me that you wouldn't know unless I tell you.
You know, Patricia, the way you describe, I can see every session for every client is actually a good doses of uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, sometimes we take it for granted. We are adjusted to listen and listen. I listen to people every day for hours. But when a client comes into silence, I really appreciate those moments because it's kind of letting it settle. This uncertainty, yeah. It's okay to be silent sometimes in therapy and to share some sacred moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, what is the second one?
The second one is risk.
Oh, we're talking about risk, yeah. Yeah.
And the third one is emotional exposure, which is what I just kind of did. Like I could have come on and smiled and pretended like everything was fine and that would be okay. But in order for you to get a little bit of a better chance to know who I am, I'm willing to say like, hey, I'm feeling a little nervous today. I'm reporting information that's not my own. I'm a little bit like, I want to get it right. I don't want to misrepresent it. It's not my language. So I'm risking a little bit with you and the listeners by saying, I can show up and be the best me that I can be, but I might make a mistake.
It wouldn't be beautiful if we show up in a relationship like that at the beginning, when we start dating or when we start a new job, but for some reason, why, Patricia? For some reason, we expect from others to hide that and to sometimes they need to pretend. I don't know. It's just in a new job, in a new relationship or whatever, we have that need to pretend.
Well, I think some of that is warranted, and I'm gonna move us on to the second question if you're okay, because this will answer the question.
Yeah.
So, what is the relationship between courage and vulnerability? You can't have courage without vulnerability. So, can you think of a time when you were courageous and you didn't have uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure? Yeah.
No.
So, I think that that's important. I think that we think of vulnerability in terms of weakness. And I love, there's an interview that Brene Brown did on Oprah's show, and they had sign language interpreters. Brene is actually recounting what I'm going to tell you on this interview with Oprah. So they had sign language interpreters on. And just a little known fact, I was actually a sign language interpreter before I was a social worker. So I have a past life. But anyways, okay. So Brene is going over with the interpreter some of the vocabulary that may be coming up during the session so that they can adjust what they're doing. And so she talked about the word vulnerability, and the social worker used the sign. This is the sign. It's a W and it's weak. And for the podcast listeners, basically, if you take an open palm, you take the sign for W and you put it down like legs and you bend it on your hands. So the sign is very weak. And that was a sign that the interpreters came up with. And Brene is like, that is just not going to work. So she talked a little bit more about it. And so the sign that they used is, if you think about putting on a coat and opening it up and exposing yourself, that was a sign that she wanted to use for vulnerability. And Brene talks a lot about the armor that we have. And so when I talk with clients, I gesture kind of putting on a coat and hunching my shoulders up towards my ear, so that, that sense of having armor on. And that's the arm that says, I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'm not going to give you information. And when I'm willing to be vulnerable, it's like opening up and allowing you to see what's underneath the coat. It reminds me of like when a dog rolls on their back and exposes their belly.
Yeah.
That means that they trust you. They're allowing you. You could get in there and hurt them. You could kick them. You could step on them, but they're trusting you. And that's what vulnerability is. But it takes courage to be able to allow people to see us being exposed.
It takes courage, and it takes, risk.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I think we do in the inappropriate environments. So, of course, it's an environment for getting hurt, yeah. And sometimes we just need to learn to be courageous. So, courageous is to have courage is something that we are born with, or we can create it, or both. What is it?
Well, what Brene says, and I'm just repeating her research because she's the researcher, is that courage is a skill that you learn. And courage is contagious. Fear is contagious. Scarcity is courageous. So courage is a skill that we learn.
And there are steps to learn it, I guess.
There are 4 of them. And what they are is learning to stay with it. So being willing to have difficult conversations with people. Oftentimes we don't like feeling uncomfortable. And if you want to have courage, which is connected to vulnerability, you need to be willing to stick with it and have difficult conversations with people.
Okay.
The second step is values. You need to know what your values are, and you need to follow what your values are. So I didn't really think this out, but off the top of my head, being honest, being kind, being compassionate, telling my truth. Those are some of my values. So when I go into a situation, if I remember what my values are, that's going to guide the communication. It's going to guide what I share, when I share it, and how I share it.
Mm-hmm.
The third one is trust. So I have to show you that I'm trustworthy, that you can tell me something and that you're going to be safe with me. I'm not going to yell at you. I'm not going to label you. I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going to tell other people. Here's the other thing that's really important, is that if you're going to be courageous and vulnerable with people, you need to also pick people that are trustworthy. So it doesn't mean that anybody you meet, you open up and you tell them all your business. And I think that's what we think vulnerability is telling all of our business. But it really means talking about what is true for us and being willing to be uncomfortable. And then the fourth one is learning to get up, because we're all going to screw this up. We're all going to mess up. No matter who we are, we're human beings having a human experience. And I think that we think that if we follow steps, if we follow rules, then the outcome will always be positive and what we want. But the reality is that we will fall many times in life. And the people that are very successful have fallen way more than they've been successful. So knowing that failing is going to be part of this process.
I liked something that you said about being vulnerable. Vulnerable doesn't mean just to open to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It means to be strategic about it, or it means to be conscious about it. Yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be very mindful. Mm-hmm. People that just tell everybody their business have no boundaries. That's not vulnerability, and that's not courageous. That's just telling everybody your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Patricia, I found very often, especially in our Latino community, I observe 2 things. People, it can be very easy to share very meaningful content, sometimes without even realizing they are sharing that meaningful content. It can be in a party. It can be anywhere. Yeah. And 2, they don't realize the impact of their stories in other people.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell our listeners how we can find in other people's faces the clues when it's too intense, too much, how we can assess the moment to be vulnerable or not?
Well, I think that we start out with very small pieces and we see how people respond.
Mm-hmm.
We also need to have a relationship with people. Glennon Doyle Melton tells this great story about when she was a mom with young children and she found it really hard. And she would be around other moms and they would go, "How's it going?" And she would say, "Oh my gosh, it's boring. I'm bored out of my mind being home all day. It's really hard. It's stressful." She told the truth. And the other moms would look at her like she just said something that was really unacceptable. And in that moment, she thought to herself, like, "Whoop, this is not the time to be honest." And so she said, "It's fine. I love it. I love being a mom." So that's a little example of, you can share in little bits and see if people respond. If somebody responds, they're going to go, "Oh my gosh, I hear what you're saying. I've had the same experience." So we start with very little things, not big things.
When I moved into this country, Patricia, that was 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I went into a party and I don't know, in my circles in Mexico, when somebody asks, "What do you think about the political?" you just answer straight, yeah? And then people start discussing and we can fight about it and then drink and then have fun and laugh, yeah?
Uh-huh.
So I entered the room and it was a bunch of women and somebody say something and I say my opinion and oh my God, it was like, I really offend some people and I still wanted to create discussion about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was like, oh no, it was terrible grown.
Yeah.
So I learned, you're right, I learned it's like, we need to assess the situation. We need to create that relationship. And sometimes it's okay to back up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there's really not a big reward if you're going to be vulnerable and share something that makes you feel really uncomfortable and the other person looks at you and they're not able to respond. And that's often just because they don't know how to respond. You're talking about something that they don't have information with. Is a highly sensitive person. I'm pretty deep and I'm pretty intense. And I've had the experience pretty much most of my life of sharing things and people just look at me like a deer in the headlights. Now I understand a little bit more about why that is. I just figured everybody was like me. We often attach a meaning to something. We share something and somebody reacts or doesn't react and we don't understand. And instead of asking for clarification, we kind of, and this is a Brene Brown term, we make up a story in our head about why they're reacting the way that they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This topic is actually, it can actually wake up some emotions in people.
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell them that if you are listening to this episode and you are kind of feeling uncomfortable or too exposed or too being seen, you can actually pause the content, come back later, take it slow. Remember, we are not aiming for therapy. This is not a therapy, even though we are mental health practitioners. This is not therapy. This is some material that will help you, even to go and work in your therapy with your therapist. So, with that being said, Patricia, would you like to share some personal examples of being vulnerable?
So I have two relationships that I'm going to talk about because they relate. I have a friend that I've known for very many years. And about 2 years ago, something happened with me that in my life that was very unexpected. And at this point, our relationship really took a shift. I think up until then, our kids went to school together. We saw each other regularly. It was a very good relationship. And when this thing happened to me, it threw my life into a tailspin. I was very angry. I was very upset. When you have big things happen in your life, it just puts you on a whole new path that you've never been on.
Yeah.
And over the past 2 years, the relationship has really shifted. We're not as close. We've had a lot of distance. And we had a conversation on the phone within the last 2 weeks. And what I realized is I had not been telling the truth in this relationship. Because of my sensitivity, I often thought, this is my problem and I need to work it out and it's not bothering this other person. I tend to have pretty high expectations in relationships and I get disappointed a lot. That's kind of a highly sensitive person thing. And I own that I expected this person to change to meet my expectations, and she didn't. And the expectation is around connection, that I have a really high need for connection. And it got to the point in our relationship where we were texting and not calling, and I would text her and it would be a week before she would text me back. And that I have wounds about abandonment from my childhood, so that would trigger my wounds. So, my part is I wasn't telling the truth. I had very high expectations. I felt disappointed, and our styles are very different. I reach out when I struggle. She retreats and goes into her cave when she struggles. And so there were just a lot of things that came into the relationship that just made it really hard to manage. So we had this very long conversation. I felt like it was a very honest conversation. I owned my part in it. And I don't think it went as well for her. And what we had talked about is this relationship may not work for you right now. She's going through some big things and she needs something specific in her life. And I think that me talking about what goes on for me triggers her. It triggers a lot of her issues. And when I express that I feel disappointment, she feels shame and she wants to withdraw. So we had this long conversation. I felt like it was a very healthy conversation. She felt like we were rehashing things. So when Brene talks about being willing to stay with difficult conversations, that's what I was doing. And I was exposing myself. But for her, I think it felt like it was too much. So we get through this conversation. Now, moving on to another relationship. I have another friend I've known for 25 years. She's lived in another country for probably the last 20 years, but we keep in touch a couple times a week through video and texting. And at the same time that I went through this with my friend, with the friend that I'm telling you about that lives in another country, I had a week where somebody I love was in the hospital. My dog spent the day at the dog vet. It was a very traumatic week. And I sent a video to her telling her what was going on. I didn't hear back from her for about 6 days. And I know that I could have sent her a message saying, hey, I really need your support, but I didn't. That's my stubbornness. So when she responded by video, we use an app called Marco Polo. So she responded by video, was very regretful that she hadn't listened to the message earlier in the week. This triggered my wounding. And I felt angry and I felt hurt. And what I wanted to do was like, I'm just going to wait 5 days and polo you back because, you hurt me and I want to hurt you too. This is, again, me bringing in my expectations. I'm going through something hard. I don't want to have to tell you I'm going through something hard. I want you to look at my videos when I send them. If you were a good friend, these are all my expectations. And having just gone through this very painful situation with the other friend, I really had to sit with it. And what I did was because we communicate via Marco Polo, it's a video. So basically I sent her a video and I was crying and I said, I'm really struggling. This is about me. This is not about you. You don't have to change your behavior. I want to be really clear. Because I'm struggling in this other relationship and I value our relationship, I don't want this to happen to us. And I felt really hurt when you didn't respond. I'm wanting to punish you. You haven't done anything wrong. This is my wounding. It brings up my abandonment issues. And I said, I want to heal. I don't know how to heal. I want to have this connection with you. I'm having these really uncomfortable feelings. You haven't done anything wrong. I don't know how to do it differently. And that felt really vulnerable, especially because of the time zone difference. I didn't get a response from her. So I had to sit with that for a few days. And then she responded and thanked me for it. We had a few polos back and forth. And what I found myself worrying about is, and then I wondered, was that too much information for her? Should I not have shared that? Maybe I should have shared that with somebody else and not with her. And I was feeling insecure. Since then, we've had a chance to talk back and forth. And what she said is, she loves our relationship. She feels so much safety in that I can tell her exactly what's going on for me. I don't blame her. She's not ever going to worry that I'm going to get mad or leave the relationship because she can trust what's going on for me. And from my perspective, I felt so valued because she loves the fact that I tell her how I'm feeling and she didn't get mad at me. She didn't tell me I was doing it wrong. She didn't tell me I was too much. I feel like this is a very intense example. This is how I live my life. This is what my relationships look like. But it really was about being able to have the conversation back and forth and not about whether she was going to respond and she didn't. It's about being able to communicate these really painful, vulnerable things that come up for us in all relationships.
I think you are giving us a beautiful gift of these contrast examples.
Mm-hmm.
One way is how it will not work, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and another how actually works because we do the job, because we work for the relationship.
Right.
So I really like your two examples, and as you were talking, as you were pointing or sharing, thank you for sharing these personal examples.
Mm-hmm.
um, I am thinking how many times in our mind we just start a conversation, finish the conversation, do everything, yeah. And normally, as you say at the beginning, normally it will be in the negative side, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we reach out or by the time we want to share or contact the other person, there is a storm already in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of my work is with couples, with couple therapy, and a lot of my work is actually putting this out, like their storms in their mind. So I guess the question that for our listeners or for our viewers is, can you work on being aware of what is it that you need? Because in the second beautiful example that you gave us is you were being aware of what you need. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can we be aware of what we need? Can we take ownership of our feelings? Can we take the courage and vulnerability to share? And let me tell you a saying. I will try to translate a saying from Spanish to English.
Okay.
There is a saying that says, don't give margaritas, which is the flowers, don't give flowers to the pig because it will get confused with
Mm-hmm.
food, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes we really need to assess, like, is the other person really ready to acknowledge, to value, to appreciate um, my intensity or my story or my exposure, or I just need to keep it for now and probably even sometimes create another relationship somewhere else. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it has been really beautiful talking to you, and it has been really relaxing.
You cut in and out. Can you tell me the very last thing you said? It has been really.
It has been really beautiful and really relaxing.
Oh, thank you.
So, yeah. So tell us a little bit about your practice. Is there anything else you want to say about this topic to close the topic? Or if not, tell us a little bit about your practice.
Well, I work with highly sensitive people. A lot of people just find out that they're highly sensitive, and often people are misdiagnosed or think that they have anxiety or depression.
Yeah.
Because we're deep thinkers, we think about things. Sometimes people tell people you ruminate, you think about things too much. And how therapy can be really helpful is as we learn about our characteristics and traits, we kind of learn to tell ourselves a new story about it. And when I learned that I was a highly sensitive person, I kind of reviewed my life and kind of rewrote the story to see that there wasn't anything that was wrong with me. And the things that I kept being told were, you're too sensitive, you're too needy, you're too picky, you think too much, you worry too much, you analyze too much. Anything that starts with too, T-O-O. And it really helped me to go back and see what my strengths are. And so that's really one of the gifts that therapy can have for people that are finding out that they're highly sensitive, is really learning how to see the strengths and the gifts, because being a highly sensitive person is amazing. And often we have wounding from childhood, and that gets mixed in with being a highly sensitive person. So people think that the things that really bug them are about being highly sensitive, but it's really the wounding that gets mixed in with the sensitivity.
That's right. I'm already thinking of a couple of my clients that I will send your way when you have your podcast.
I would love that.
Well, and also for the Emotions in Harmony listeners, if you want to go back, we have an episode in English and in Spanish about highly sensitive person. Go and listen to it. And of course, we will share with you in the notes Patricia's links and all the information so you can wait for that podcast to show up. Yeah?
That'd be great. And then I have some videos on my website and my YouTube channel, which I know you're going to put in the notes. So if you're curious about if you're a highly sensitive person, you can go check out the videos that I have. You can also go to hsperson.com, which is Dr. Elaine Aron's website. She's really the person who coined the trait highly sensitive person.
Yeah, we will put again that website, the HSP, and is in that other video that we did, and we will put it again here, and it definitely will be the links to your videos. Thank you for creating all of this wonderful material.
Thank you for having me. It's just been a joy to be here.
Well, Patricia, thank you. And thank you, wonderful listeners and viewers. Remember, if you liked, you enjoy, or it was useful, this episode, the best gift you can do for our show is to share. To please go and share with your friends. As I always say, go and share with the ones that you don't like, so hopefully you like them better in the future. Go and share an opinion, please, in the Apple Podcast, in every platform. Everything is really appreciated. You can also send a message, contact at carmen@emotionsinharmony.org. And you can go to Patreon. We are now in Patreon. We are collecting funding because as a nonprofit, we want to keep going. We want to keep producing this content for you. And we want to keep putting all this money together so we can also in the office keep providing services for victim witness, for victims of crime. So anything, your share, your like, your donation, whatever you want to give us, we are really, really grateful. Bye for now.
We have ended one more episode of Emotions in Harmony. See you the next one, when Dr. Carmen Roman will help us to have a more fulfilled life caring for ourselves and the ones we care for. Meanwhile, visit www.emotionsinharmony.com to see the show notes, subscribe, and enjoy more content.